What do you think of the debate?
It was great. It was great. Very informative.
Anything else want to comment?
I thought it was great to see so many Republicans gathered in one room together.
I thought it was a very good debate. Questions were good. Most of the answers were good. And I really believe that it showed a distinction between the candidates. And I think that the results selected the right candidate.
Thank you.
It was fantastic. We had 4 really informed candidates, which is terrific, and an excellent turnout. So people were very interested in paying attention to this race.
Who said the Republican Party was dead in Massachusetts, huh? I don't see that at all around here. A couple of housekeeping things. I'm Jeff Perry, and I'm going to be your moderator today. So thank you for coming on behalf of the Sandwich Republican Town Committee and all the candidates and all the activists. A couple of housekeeping things. Jerry Fortin, our treasurer for the town committee, is right here. Jerry?
Sir. If you care to make a donation or programs right here or signing up for the SRTC website or information, please, it's up here at the table. I am at your service.
Thank you, Jerry. All of the candidates who are running for office this year have their nomination papers around. You may have signed them. If you haven't yet, there's a table behind those gentlemen over there, the table in blue, with all the campaign nomination papers for every office you've heard of and some you haven't heard of. They need to get your signatures, so at some point after the event, if you haven't signed those papers, they would appreciate it, and so would I. 2 housekeeping things. One is if you have a cell phone, if you'd make sure it's on mute or silent or vibrate, something not to interrupt the flow of the event, I would appreciate it. I already did mine, so I think I'm good. Applause is a thing that happens a lot in these debates. I'm going to ask you to restrain yourself. I know these 4 gentlemen are going to say things that you just want to yell and cheer and be so supportive of. But every time we have an applause break, it's going to make the event longer and less flowing, and we're going to be able to get to less questions. So I'd ask you if you limit your applause until the appropriate times at the end of the program. And you're all going to have an opportunity to vote in a straw poll and express your opinions. So before we start the event, I'd like to have 2 gentlemen come forward who will lead us in the pledge. Mr. Ted Tice, who is a Special Forces Army veteran from Vietnam. And Mr. Tom Sullivan, who is the chairman of the Disabled American Veterans Association here in Cape Cod. So if you would stand and allow these 2 heroes to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance to our nation.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, gentlemen. So in addition to the debate, this is also a straw poll. And this, Lisa and Jen, will you pass out the straw polls now? Yes. So these 2 lovely ladies are going to pass out, if you'd stay where you are so we can make sure we get to everyone, a ballot. And there are 2 questions on the ballot that you'll have the opportunity to weigh into after the debate has concluded. It's self-explanatory, but the 2 questions are, who do you believe won the debate, regardless of who you support, and who you would be most likely to vote for if the election were held today. So these 4 gentlemen are going to debate for about an hour, hour and a half before you, and you're going to hear their positions. So I'd urge you to wait to vote, obviously, before you make your decisions. And then these 4 gentlemen are going to get a gauge of the community today, the activists today, the people who care enough about this race and where they are today. And I think it's going to be extremely helpful. Chapman. Cogliano. And Dan Shore. So the format of the debate is we'll begin with opening statements in alphabetical order. Each candidate will have 3 minutes. They don't have to take the entire time, but up to 3 minutes to introduce themselves. We have 2 lovely timers here, Jen Wilson and Lisa Perry. Candidates, if you look at them, they have 2 signs for you. One is 30 seconds, and the other, which happens to be red, is stop. If I see the stop sign up and you don't stop, I'm going to have to stop you to make it fair, and I do like all of you, so pay heed to the sign.
Looks like we're better.
Yes. After the opening statements, 3 minutes each, we'll have a round of questions from our GOP activist panel, which includes Mr. Dave Neal, Mrs. Kathy Barrett, Mr. Gene Perini, and Mrs. Pat Stebbins. Following that round, we'll have a lightning round of questions where the candidates will have to respond with a simple yes or no, which is always tough for the moderators to get them to do that. And then we will close with a round of closing statements also in alphabetical order. So let's get it going. Gentlemen ready?
Yes.
Mr. Alliegro, you have 3 minutes.
Good afternoon. I've lived in Falmouth for about 7 years now, but I've lived in 10 cities and towns and in 7 states in this country. And I've traveled in the majority of the other 50, of all the 50 states, both for business and for pleasure. Marianne and I have friends and colleagues and acquaintances in every corner of this country. And when we speak to them, and we keep in touch with them to this day, when we speak to them, there's a remarkable similarity in the things that they say. These people are very, very worried. They're afraid even. They're afraid for their futures, and they're afraid for the future of this country. So yes, they worry about specific subjects like that fiasco we call Obamacare, the hobbled economy, our bleak jobs outlook, and our busted school system. But what they're really afraid for is something much more fundamental than those things. We'll talk about those things specifically today. They're afraid for their freedoms. They're afraid for their very freedoms in this country. It boils down to a lack of trust. There's a disregard and even a disdain for our Constitution. Now, the lack of trust. I want everybody to do a silent poll right here. Can we do a silent poll in advance? A silent straw poll in your heads right now. How many people in this room trust your representatives in Washington, D.C.? I don't have to wait for an answer. Okay. So if you want to know why I'm running for office, these are the reasons. I'm running for office because I believe that people across this country and the people in this room are tired of candidates who stake out positions because they think that 51% of the electorate supports those positions. I'm running because I believe that people in this room are tired of hearing the same old, worn-out, pre-prepared, mind-numbing talking points, regardless of stripe. And I'm running now because I think people in this country and in this room are bone-tired of asking questions of their representatives and getting gobbledygook in return. So, I believe in these things, and starting today, I want you to see a stark difference, a specific difference in this candidacy and in this campaign. I answer questions for a living. When you ask me questions, I'm going to give you answers. You may not like them all. You may have better answers formulated in your own heads, but you're going to get an answer. Not rhetoric, not tired excuses, just honest attempts at solutions. So I'm going to close down now because I know my 30-second card has already come up. I'm going to do my best to give honest, thorough, and factual answers to every question, and I look forward to each and every question. Thank you.
John?
Good afternoon, and thank you, Jeff, and thank you to all the members of the Sandwich Republican Town Committee for hosting this debate today. It's great to see such interest in this race so early. Your support's invaluable. We cannot elect a Republican to Congress without the hard work of people like all of you. I've entered this race because I believe Washington is broken. It's grown polarized. It's become more arrogant and lost touch with the people it represents. Congress doesn't listen. Our federal government is too big. Our national debt is $17 trillion and growing. And all we have taking place in Washington is partisan politics. I am a fiscal conservative who believes in smaller government, lower taxes, and more individual freedom. That's something I learned from Ronald Reagan, who gave me my first job, and who I consider a political mentor. I've worked in government, in the private sector, and then most recently in the nonprofit area. What got me to run for Congress is Obamacare, which has been a complete and utter disaster. I believe states and not the federal government should take care of their own health care needs. When it comes to spending, I believe deeply that the federal government should have what we already have here in Massachusetts, and that's a balanced budget amendment. President Obama just this past week proposed another budget. And no surprise, it contains no spending reductions, but contains plenty of new taxes. Our government needs to do what each and every one of us does every month. We sit down at the table, we balance our checkbook, and we make sure that we're not spending more than comes in the door. I also believe that America is an exceptional country, and we need to protect and preserve this great nation and our way of life. We must always remember that Americans and others who've come before us, like my father and my father-in-law, who served this country in uniform, sacrificed and gave so much to make America the extraordinary country and world leader that we are. We need to maintain our leadership position in the world through a strong military and strong economic policies. I refuse to accept a decline in America's prosperity and power. Thank you. I look forward to our discussions today.
Vince?
Good afternoon, everyone. Happy to be here. Thank you to Jeff and the Sandwich Town Committee for sponsoring this event. I'm a father, a grandfather. I grew up in the district. I graduated from Silver Lake in Kingston, Massachusetts. I went to college on the GI Bill, graduated with honors with a degree in business. Since then, I have been a businessman for the most part. I worked in the media, but I started 3 companies. I've worked for several other large companies. The reason that I want to run is because I'm dealing firsthand with the economy and have been for quite some time. My company had 54 employees several years ago. We're below 30 now. We'll survive, but it's because we've had to cut in so many ways, because this economy is not working for this country. And it's tough. I tell people in the 70s and in the 80s and the 90s, if you had to let someone go, and that happened occasionally, at least you could rationalize and say, the economy is great, they'll find another job. Today, when you let someone go, as I had to in December, I don't know if that person will be able to find a job to feed their family, to pay the rent and the other bills, and it's tough, and it's unnecessary. This all has been caused by Washington, and it's staying around because of Washington, and anyone in this room who runs a small business knows exactly what I'm talking about. I want to go to Washington because I have the experience and know-how to get things done and to make the economy better so that small businesses can start to employ people once again instead of having to lay them off. Wall Street is getting their payoff, $75 billion a month. These are Democrats who claim they're for Main Street, but Wall Street gets $75 billion a month to prop up the market And so that big corporations and the 1% have seen their income rise while our income has gone down. What have we gotten out of it? Extended welfare benefits, extended unemployment, and more food stamps. And that's not America. That's not the America I want to live in. I want to go to Washington and get sensible tax reform, corporate and individual, an energy policy that works for people and gets us to energy independence. And that will help the economy as well. And get rid of a lot of senseless rules and regulations, including Obamacare, which is going to really hurt my business and anyone else's that's going to be responsible for this program. Thank you.
Right, Dan?
Good afternoon, good evening, I guess. It's kind of coming up good evening. But veterans, Jeff, Randy, Sandwich Republican Town Committee, dignitaries, candidates, ladies and gentlemen, we all come from different backgrounds. I grew up in Carver in this district, and my father owned a logging company as a kid. So I worked with my dad in his logging company. I also worked on cranberry bogs in Carver to make money when I was a kid. The first thing I bought was a fishing pole because I really loved to fish, and that was a great thing. I earned the money and I was able to purchase my fishing pole. And I also remember as a kid dreaming of things that I wanted to do in my life. At the time, those dreams seemed very far away, but my family instilled in me a belief that if I worked for it, I could achieve whatever I wanted to. I wanted to go to college, so I earned an engineering degree. I put myself through college. I wanted to go to law school, so I worked very hard and I graduated from Georgetown University Law Center. Then I wanted to become an attorney, and I became a successful attorney in Washington, D.C. at one of the best law firms in the world. So I went from logger, bogger to successful lawyer in Washington, D.C. That has been part of my American dream. I'm running for Congress to make sure that the American dream is alive and well for future generations. But that's in serious jeopardy right now. We're $17 trillion in debt, and we have a president that believes that more government is the answer to our problems. We have a Massachusetts congressional delegation that serves as a rubber stamp to his policies. We the people control our own destinies, not the government. We control whether laws or regulations are put in place and whether laws or regulations are removed. We do that by who we vote into office. We can vote the right people into office and vote the wrong people out. And we sit on a mountain of potential here in this district. Sandwich is one of the most beautiful places on the planet, even though we have Republicans here, right? So I'm confident we can create a pro-growth economic environment again for our businesses and communities, and it's time to live in anticipation of the future again. We will pay the debt, and we will eliminate the deficit. We will repeal Obamacare and solve the problems with healthcare costs. We will honor our veterans. We will have a strong national security and a credible foreign policy. We will be prosperous again, but prosperity will not be given to us. We have to work for it. We have to fight for it. And I will fight for it in Congress if elected. Thank you.
Okay, now we're going to go to our GOP activist panel. With the first question will be asked, starting with you, Mark, from Dave Neal. Dave?
Yes, Mr. Alliegro. Considering the environmental and economic impacts, do you support or oppose the completion of the Keystone Pipeline, and why?
I support it. I support it because this is deeply intermingled not only with environmental issues but with economic issues. It's a fact that the most polluting countries in the world are the ones that are struggling economically most. Advanced countries with advanced economies are generally the cleanest, or without exception, the cleanest countries. So our economy is integrally related to our environment. So Keystone Pipeline, the options are to put a lot of fuel into trucks and truck it across the continent, or to put it on rail, which doesn't really exist yet, and would be prohibitively expensive, or to use the cleanest and least expensive manner of transporting that fuel, and that's by pipeline. That's how our major volumes of fuels are transported in this country right now. So, you know, the question, I think you mentioned our environment. We're in a grip right now. What do we have, 2 minutes?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, 2 minutes.
We're in a grip right now of, and listen, I grew up in the 1970s. I was there for the first Earth Day. So I'm an environmentalist. I'm a marine biologist, or at least I've had most of my career at marine biology laboratories. I love the environment. I turn off lights when I leave the room, and I believe in conserving energy. Right? This is all part of being an environmentalist. But we're in the grip of an element that is a little bit overzealous in their embracing of the environment. To the expense of our economy and the welfare and the well-being of our citizens. And whether or not they understand it or pretend not to understand it, at the very expense of the environment they're trying to protect. So the answer to your question is, yes, I support the rapid completion of the Keystone Pipeline.
Thank you. Mr. Chapman, your response to the same question.
I also support the Keystone Pipeline. And like Mark mentioned, it's economic issues, and it's an opportunity to provide jobs for people in this country. I'm also a supporter of promoting green energy and clean energy. I think what we should do in this country with regard to energy and getting more of it here, we need to focus our issues on more energy independence. That's sort of the guiding principle that I have. And we need to reduce our reliance on fossil fuels. Oil and coal. So yes, I support it.
Thank you. Mr. Cogliano.
There are pipelines everywhere. You may not know it, you may not see them because pipelines as a rule are underground. They don't cause too many problems. This one has been studied more than any other pipeline in the history of pipelines. It will create 42,000 jobs is the estimate, and if I'm not mistaken, John Kerry might even be for it. He may not be. It depends if he was for it before and later on he wasn't. But his is one of the final decisions. It's safe. It'll create jobs. It will help our economy. Build it now.
I think we've run the table here, swept it here. I support the Keystone Pipeline also, and I think that you know, it's certainly good for the economy. There's no question about that. But there's also, we have to, I think, take an approach where we derive energy from a lot of different places, and we have to be pragmatic about where we get those energy sources. We also have to think about the way that technology can spur economic growth. I know this. I'm an engineer. I worked with high-tech companies. New tech, high tech spurs economic growth, creates jobs, builds businesses, creates jobs. And so I think we have to be comprehensive with how we look at energy and not be so obsessed with environmental protection. I think environmental protection is very, very important, extremely important. And especially in this district, we have beautiful coastlines, and we have to preserve the environment. There's no question about that. But we also have to be practical about how we derive that energy. I mean, yeah, that energy and what kind of technologies we invest in for the future. And so I support the Keystone Pipeline. I also support other energy sources that are derived from high tech and that will create jobs for our economy.
Mrs. Barrett will ask the next question directed initially to Mr. Chapman.
Mr. Chapman. During the hearings about the Benghazi scandal, Hillary Clinton asked, "What difference does it make?" when referring to how and why Americans were killed. It appears Congressman Keating was silent on this statement made by Mrs. Clinton. Do you believe Mr. Keating was correct to remain silent? If not, what would you have done if a member of Congress?
Well, first, when it comes to national security issues, I believe that we live in the greatest country in the world, and a country for values, that we have values and a country worth protecting. Unfortunately, like we had overseas in Benghazi, although we're a strong and good nation, there are people and nations around us that just don't like us. So beyond our borders, I'm really concerned with our diminishing influence in the world. And we have radical jihadists as well as the folks in Benghazi who want to cause a collapse of our country and our way of life and what we believe. Even on our own soil, the Boston Marathon is a good example. Government has no higher duty than to keep our citizens safe, whether they're in this country or outside of it. So what we have with the Obama administration is we have a philosophy that's unclear, it's weak, and it's misdirected. And I know we can do better. I would not have remained silent because at those hearings, we owe it to every citizen of this country to stand up and speak when they can.
Mr. Cogliano.
Thank you. The first line of defense in national security is diplomacy. And this State Department failed in so many ways in their, not only the diplomatic mission, but in terms of protecting our people in that embassy who had called for help, who had said that they didn't feel secure there. The Secretary and others in the department did nothing. To me, that's the bigger failure, and that's where, if I was a congressman, I would have stood up and said something. Because this was entirely preventable. And if, as a policy of national security, your diplomacy is failing, that's your first line of defense. There's not much else after that. I'd sure like to see what they're here, what Leon Panetta has to say about it. He's never testified, and he's the one who can tell us for certain whether or not those jets could have been scrambled from, what was it, 90 miles away? So yes, I would have said on many levels that this is a problem and it needs to be addressed, and I'm so unhappy and angry that it hasn't been addressed by the media and not strongly enough by Congress.
Mr. Chouris?
Would you mind repeating the question? I just want to make sure I have the full measure of it. Great.
Certainly. Certainly. Okay. During the hearings about the Benghazi scandal, Hillary Clinton asked, "What difference does it make?" when referring to how and why Americans were killed. It appears Congressman Keating was silent on this statement made by Mrs. Clinton. Do you believe Mr. Keating was correct to remain silent? If not, what would you have done if a member of Congress?
No, and if I were in Congress, I would have been the loudest voice there. And I'll say this: what happened with Ambassador Stevens? Ambassador Stevens was one of ours. Where's that investigation? I seem to remember. I'm actually old enough to remember the Iranian hostage crisis, and to see day after day the countdown in the media because our citizens were being held captive in Iran against their will. That was a national attention. That was a national tragedy, and they came home when President Reagan became president. And that was a victory for us. And to have the administration hide the facts about this ambassador, to what happened for political reason, it's an absolute disgrace.
Mr. Alliegro.
I'm going to have something to say about Mr. Keating's silence on a number of issues later. But this also illustrates exactly what I was saying in my open statement. People are disgusted and sick and tired of asking questions and not receiving answers. Now, your question was, what would I have done if I was in that room with Mrs. Clinton and she said, "What does it matter?" The first thing I would have done would have been to hammer her. I would have hammered her until she answered that question. And the second thing I would have done would have been to not leave that room until I had my answers. The Capitol Guards would have had to drag me out by the ankles. We still don't know where the president was for those critical hours that night. I would have explained to Mrs. Clinton, why does it matter, Mrs. Clinton? It matters so that it doesn't happen again. That's why the last time mattered, because we're supposed to be learning from our mistakes. Let's hope that we all learn from our mistakes in the next round of elections.
Thank you. The next question will be from Mr. Perini to Mr. Cogliano.
Mr. Cogliano, if you could have lunch with any one person, dead or alive, who would it be and why?
That's a tough one. There are so many people in history that are, would be so interesting to sit down and speak to. But for me, you think of George Washington, which I love to sit down with him, or Abraham Lincoln, who went through the Civil War, one of the toughest presidencies in history. But for me, one of the most interesting people to me in history is Alexander Hamilton. Very quietly and ignored so much by the history books, Alexander Hamilton was so responsible for helping George Washington in the American Revolution by bringing in money, by finding ways to pay the troops or keep them in place, by being counsel to George Washington. He started a central banking system in America. He did so many things and was just such an interesting person, the ups and downs in his life, the times he came back from very tough situations, which all of us have had to do at one time or another, and that's the measure of a person, is whether or not they can get up again and become productive. And he was a person who could. I admire him greatly, and I'd love to sit down and talk with him for a while.
Mr. Shores?
I'd like to, as Vince said, I'd like to, there are tons of historical figures, Abraham Lincoln, George Washington, Ronald Reagan, that it would be an absolute pleasure to sit down and learn from them. But the American that comes to mind, limiting it to Americans, the American that comes to mind is Mark Twain. And I believe he was one of the most original, unique figures in our history. He was born when Halley's Comet was charging through the sky, and he died as Halley's Comet was going through the sky. He had a very, very interesting life, and I really love his writing. And so he was a very funny man. He did a lot of, he would go on the lecture circuit. He got into debt so bad that he spent all the money from the books that he wrote. He had to go on the lecture circuit. And the lecture circuit was literally going to town by town and giving these, it was like a stand-up comedy act where he would, give his little spiel. And he got such a command over the audience that there was one event where he was there and he walked out on stage and he didn't say a word. And it was silence, and then you heard a laugh over here and a laugh over here, and everyone laughed, and that's when he knew he was with the audience and everything. He's a very unique guy. I'd love to spend some time with him.
Yep. Mark?
The American or Americans that I would give anything to sit down with are my mother and father. When you're a kid and you have wonderful parents, you understand how hard they worked. Well, you don't understand. You get hints and tidbits about it, but you don't really understand it. When you grow older and you have to work hard yourself, you appreciate the things that they did. My folks weren't blue bloods. They struggled to put food on the table. They didn't have the luxury of graduating from high school like so many of us do today. They had to drop out and they had to work to help support their families during the Depression. Spoke to my mom and dad a lot. We had a wonderful relationship. I'd love to speak to my father about his experiences in the war. He spent 3 years in the Pacific on a 110-foot wooden-hulled subchaser. You can't imagine it. 3 years in all of those islands, not just a couple, all of them. I'm not going to spew them again, because that's part of my regular little speech. My mother, who dropped out of high school at the age of 14 and lied about her age so that she can work in a teapot factory to help support the family. I'd like to ask her, now as an adult, what it was like, Mom. What was it like for you to make sure that you put clothes on our back, food on the table, and a roof over our head? Those are the Americans that I would give anything to speak to right now.
John?
Mark, I had someone in mind, and I agree with you about my mother and father. That was very nice. I'd like to have them here too. But to answer the question in this form, and who I'm thinking about, who I'd like to have lunch with and reconnect with, is my first boss and my political mentor, Ronald Reagan. He is a man of integrity and a man of character. He didn't compromise any conservative values, but he worked on a bipartisan basis, and things got done in Washington. He's the only Republican, and this is something we'd like to see more in Massachusetts, who actually, the only recent history Republican president who won an election in Massachusetts twice. And about now, I'd like to have his oratory skills as well. So it would be Ronald Reagan.
The next question will come from Mrs. Stebbins, directed to Mr. Shores.
Mr. Shores, our troops have been fighting the war against terrorism bravely since 2001. What is your position on the success of their mission, and do you think all of our troops should come home now?
Thank you very much, and I've been leaning into the microphone. Are you guys able to hear me from here, or is it better this way? Okay. Well, first of all, anyone that serves on behalf of our nation is an absolute patriot. They are the heroes that we need to honor every single day. My first year of law school is when 9/11 happened, and that hit me right here, and it's still there. And we were attacked, blindsided, innocent women and children and other adults were killed that day. And that's something that we can never forget. If there's anything that we learned that day, is that we need to anticipate what the threats are. There's a huge threat right now that isn't really put out there in the press, and that's with cyber terror. And there's a 60 Minutes piece that was in 2007 that indicated that there was a foreign entity that had downloaded 12 terabytes of information from our various departments. And to give you context, 12 terabytes is about equivalent to the amount of information in the Library of Congress, of classified information. That happened in 2007. We need to be vigilant. And I can also recall before 2001, reading the paper about Osama bin Laden in the New York Times, thinking, geez, that'll never happen to us. We need to be vigilant. And if we have troops that are abroad in a engagement that is not productive, isn't accomplishing the mission, then they need to come home. But we need to be vigilant abroad as well as at home.
Mr. Alliegro?
Would you repeat that question? I'd like to answer it precisely.
Yes. Dr. Alliegro, our troops have been fighting the war against terrorism bravely since 2001. What is your position on the success of the mission, and do you think all of our troops should come home now?
I think we were having success until the individual who currently occupies the Oval Office took power in Washington. We just before he came in, we had our first surge. Listen, I've spoken to a number of veterans, and I can never imagine what it must be like to be out in the field, sent to do a mission, and have one hand tied behind your back, immediately have someone yanking back on the reins and not letting you go and do the job that you're supposed to do. So my answer to the question is if we're not going to let our military do what they need to do, then bring them home. And I think that answers it as close up. However, I'll finish it by saying, if we're going to deploy our military and ask them to do a particular job, then we should leave them there until the job is done, safely, securely, and stably, which we have not done, neither in Iraq nor in Afghanistan, and truly, with just a couple of exceptions, haven't done since World War II.
Thank you. Mr. Chapman?
I'm going to step back a minute and just mention my political philosophy about our national security first, which is to maintain peace through strength. That was what my political mentor always said, and I believe that. We need to maintain a strong military, and we need to protect our national interest in the interests of our friends and allies. Particularly those who support and embrace our democratic way of life. As I mentioned before, the current administration's policies are unclear, and they're misdirected, and they're weak, and we can do so much better. The reason we went into Iraq and the reason we went into Afghanistan are related reasons. We went into Iraq because we thought there were weapons of mass destruction. Went into Afghanistan because of the threat of Al-Qaeda. I think our troops should come home, just like Mark said, when we know our job is done. And the reasons we went into these foreign places, and we want to make sure that that the country is secure and safe, and that our interests for ourselves and our allies are also secure and safe.
Mr. Cogliano.
Does everyone here remember General Norman Schwarzkopf?
Yes.
General Schwarzkopf was a lieutenant colonel in Vietnam. Like a lot of folks who were in Vietnam, he was not very happy about the way that war was conducted and the needless deaths of so many people that he led in battle. When he was asked to take over as the commanding general for the first Gulf War, he said he would, but under one condition. I'll do it if you let me win. That's what he did. In war, that must be the goal, is to win. You don't commit your troops to let them give up their lives senselessly for no gain or for a stalemate. That's not the way it's done. We need more generals, and by the way, we've got a lot fewer of generals in the Pentagon like Norman, because so many of them have left because they've been so unhappy. And that's a tough thing. As to whether or not we should get out, my answer is yes, now. We're not committed to winning. We're only committed to getting more people killed for no gain. I was in the military. I don't want to see anyone who served die needlessly. And right now, for the foreseeable future, this is a bad war, and we shouldn't be there.
The next question will come from Mr. Neal and start with Mr. Alliegro.
Dr. Alliegro, the Congressional Budget Office now states that some 2.5 million Americans will lose their jobs because of the impact of Obamacare. Congressman Keating supports Obamacare and seems silent on reform ideas. What is your position?
Obamacare was, well, my position first to answer your question. Repeal it. Repeal it in pieces before it collapses and leaves a calamity in its wake. That's the answer to your question. Obamacare was instituted, theoretically, for two reasons. One was to ensure the estimated 30 million Americans that we had that were uninsured at the time. Two was to cut back on the cost of medical health insurance in this country. Let's examine both of those goals. Today, after just a couple of months of semi-full-fledged Obamacare, we have more Americans uninsured than we did before. At the end of this year, it's projected that we'll have, instead of 30 million uninsured Americans, we'll have 50 million uninsured Americans. That may come down. The rosy projections are that it may come down by 2024 to where it started. So that's number one. Obamacare did not and is not going to insure largely the same pool of people who weren't insured before. Item number two is the cost. Obamacare was supposed to reduce costs. We all know that, as Mr. Neal said, it's going to lead to unemployment, and the CBO has just revised their numbers upwardly. We all know that the cost is skyrocketing on a daily basis, and even the cost of premiums. And we have a model here in Massachusetts where we have a precursor to Obamacare, and for all of its benefits and pluses and minuses, the fact of the matter is that health insurance in Massachusetts has gone up to become the highest insurance cost in the country. We already know the CBO projections for individual states. They're due to increase by anywhere from 20% up to 200%, depending on the state and exchange. It's a disaster. Dump it.
Mr. Chapman.
Well, as I mentioned in my opening statement, Obamacare is why I'm running. It's the issue that got me off the couch. It's a complete failure. And just like you mentioned, Dave, the CBO, which by the way is a nonpartisan body, issued this report talking about 2.5 million jobs that are lost. It also mentioned there's going to be $1 trillion added to the budget. That's far from being affordable. Bill Keating, as Dave just mentioned, has defended Obamacare every step of the way. This reason alone should keep him from being re-elected. And I'm a federalist when it comes to health care. And our states should come up with the solutions. Obamacare is too expensive and there's too much federal government intervention.
Jeff, I'd like to hear more of what they're saying. The sound doesn't seem to be carrying.
Maybe if the candidates could move the mics a little bit towards them. Go ahead, John.
I was just getting to the most pivotal point. Or you missed it. So I'm a federalist when it comes to health care. Our state should come up with the solutions, and Obamacare is too expensive and too much federal government intervention. I'd rather let the states design their own programs, just as we did here in Massachusetts. I would support the repeal of Obamacare. However, I think that's hard since we're at the place right now, it's already in effect. I think we should revert to the status quo we had here in Massachusetts. States are in a better position to understand the healthcare needs of their citizens. Romney Care was not perfect, but it was put into effect on a bipartisan basis without raising taxes. And that's it. Thank you.
Vince?
Well, I have to approach this again as a small business person who doesn't want to have to let more people go. Right now, in this state, we do have the highest health care cost in America. A recent study by the Pioneer Institute says we can expect under Obamacare a possible additional 90+% increase. My small company, we pay $15,000 a month in health insurance costs. That might not sound like a lot, but if it doubles to $30,000, I'm going to have to once again lay off some people because that's what's required. The economy isn't good enough that I can simply say, well, we'll raise our sales and bring in more dollars to pay for it. If we had a government that was supporting business and doing the right thing, I might be able to say that. But I can't, so this means I would have to let some people go again. It's a bad law. It doesn't deserve our support. I believe it can be repealed. I believe that once the employer mandate goes in, it's going to really decimate employment in this country, as it already has. And we just learned the other day that public employees are now being affected by it. Colleges, laying off people or cutting their hours. A lot of other public employees. This is the fallacy that unions and public employees have always thought, well, that's for everyone else. We can avoid this. That's never been the plan. It's to have everyone in it. And as I've said before, anyone working for a public or private union, the only way you're going to stop being under the exchanges as everyone else is to vote for a Republican. I'd happily take your vote.
Mr. Shores?
So the Congressional Budget Office, as the call of the question indicates, 2 million full-time jobs by 2017. The rationale that the CBO gave was that Obamacare was an implicit tax on earning money. What country are we living in here right now? An implicit tax, so the leadership is taxing your desire to earn money, to be successful, to get a job. That is wrong. Obamacare is wrong. Obamacare has to be repealed. What Obamacare does, it takes $716 billion out of Medicare. It pulls money. It takes money and moves it from one place to there. It comes from $716 in Medicare. Comes from taxes on medical devices like wheelchairs, walkers, pacemakers, real estate taxes, penalties. It moves that. It expands Medicaid. It expands Medicaid coverage, and then it subsidizes insurance policies for those that can't afford it. And then if this goes wrong, the government is supposed to bail out the insurance companies. And to top it all off, the IRS is the enforcement mechanism for this. I mean, this is absolute, it's a redistribution of wealth. And in addition to that, it takes away our freedoms. If you ask, I mean, I've talked to people, they have policies they purchased on the exchanges. Gender reassignment surgery is in their policy, they have no choice. My friend doesn't have any children. Pediatric dental care is required. And we're footing the bill for this. And maybe Justice Roberts was correct, even though I think there was a serious Commerce Clause issue. It is a tax. It's a huge tax. It can be repealed. We can do what we want. We can vote the right people in and vote the wrong people out. We can take laws away, and we can and we can put the right laws in. That's all I have to get the stop sign.
Mrs. Barrett, the next question starting with Mr. Chapman.
Mr. Chapman, on the subject of immigration, while there are many complicated issues, please explain your position on 2 areas. First, do you support the construction of a security fence along the wall of our southern border? And second, would you vote against any immigration bill that allowed for a form of amnesty of illegal immigrants currently in the United States?
Yes and yes. But let me step back a minute and talk about my views on immigration. We're a nation of immigrants, in a country that's become great because of our immigration spirit. We are also a nation of laws, and our immigration system is a mess, and we absolutely do need reform. This is another example of where government's not getting the job done. I am for legal immigration. In fact, I think we should encourage it and streamline the process for those who are here in the country legally. We have over 4 million immigrants waiting patiently in line to become law-abiding citizens. I'm against illegal immigration. What does that mean? We need to secure our borders, just like you were mentioning. Something that's talked about all the time, it's time to get serious about it. And I oppose amnesty. Amnesty is not the solution, and it sends the wrong message for those playing by the rules and waiting for citizenship. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Cogliano?
Well, if you hear some people in Washington talk, we don't have a problem with illegal immigrants anymore. They're not coming over in as big a numbers as before. That is true. The reason is, it's better for them to go to places like Chile where the economy is good and they can find jobs. Having a bad economy is no way to solve the problem of illegals coming over our border. The fence, that's a good start. No amnesty, that's also a good start. We keep hearing that the American people in poll after poll want immigration reform. And you get the idea that Republicans are holding it up and all of the rest of the country wants it and they want amnesty. That's not true. If you actually read the polls, you find that people want a solution, but they want border security. And they don't want people coming in unless we ask them in. I wonder how many of you would be willing to give me your home address and tell me you'll leave your doors unlocked so that at any time I can come and go as I please. Got good food, drinks? I'd love to be able to come in and take it free. But there are laws against that. And there should be laws against illegal immigration, and it should be enforced because you have to decide who you want coming into your country. And the other thing is, we only allow a very small percentage of people with degrees, with ideas to start businesses, to create jobs, to do some really good things. We don't let them in. People in Washington are saying, well, those people with third-grade educations who are coming in, they'll start businesses. We can't let those people with master's and doctorate come in because they're dangerous. We need a whole revamp of the immigration system in this country.
Thank you, Mr. Shores.
Yes, and legal immigration, right? We have the distinction, legal and illegal immigration. Legal immigration, I think, is universally, that's everywhere we came from. My we're all immigrants that have probably most likely descended from immigrants. My great-great-grandfather immigrated from Italy. He worked, my great-grandfather, his son worked at a shoe factory in Weymouth, and then my grandfather was a school teacher, and everyone has their own story. So that's good, and there are laws in place that allow proper legal immigration in the United States. Illegal immigration is exactly what it says. It's not legal. Someone had come into this country and broken our laws. We are a nation of laws. The laws need to be followed. And I believe in we have this, I think it's in vogue now in Washington. Let's just solve every problem and get this big raft of legislation in one foul swoop to solve the problem. I don't agree with that. I believe in a step-by-step approach. I think we secure the border. Defense, I would, there are some questions on whether the effectiveness of that, There's a symbolic aspect too, with putting a wall up and things like that. I think that would need to be considered. But there's various technologies that can be used, and enforcement and patrol agents can be increased. There's ways to solve the problem, but we have to secure the border. When you're talking about a path to citizenship, that's fine. If there are illegals in here, perhaps there's no real punishment, but they need to get to the back of the line because there's legal immigrants that have been waiting to get into this country and following the rules. But in any case, it's tough to endorse a sensible path to citizenship when the President of the United States does not enforce the laws. That is a problem. So I think the first thing we do is secure the border. As in a piece of legislation, secure the border. I would vote for a comprehensive securing of the border legislation, but after that, we'd have to see what we can do to solve that problem.
Mark? There were two components to the question. Let me answer them directly first, and then I'll elaborate a little bit. So, taking them in reverse order, supporting amnesty or not. I do not support amnesty. That's the simple answer. The first act coming into this country is an illegal one, and I don't believe you should be rewarded for that. The second question is supporting a wall or not. This is a tough one. If necessary, a wall can and should be erected. It should be a last resort effort. There are three components really to solving this problem. One of them is border security, and that doesn't necessarily involve a wall. But if you're going to put up a wall, I had an interesting conversation with a rancher in Bisbee, Arizona just the other day on the phone. I'm going to go visit this fellow come April. And he suggests that we get a little bit imaginative about this. And first of all, if you're going to put up a wall or not, you have to patrol that border with horses. Item number two is you need to shut off the spigot of benefits and exploitive jobs. Right? America is not a country that takes pride in exploiting the misfortune of others. Right? And the third component is, and this goes right to the second one as well, the third component is a well-managed visitor working program, not visiting worker program. Now we have a visiting worker program. And believe it or not, we actually have laws that cover all these things I'm talking about. We need to enforce them, but we have a visiting worker program. But, and it needs to be managed such that we track immigrants who will come here on worker visas, just like they do from Europe and around the world. We can track when they arrive, where they are, and when it's time for them to go home or to apply for an extension. The answer to your question, support wall, yes, if necessary, more of a last resort. Support amnesty, no.
Thank you. The next question from Mr. Perini. We'll start with Mr. Cogliano.
Mr. Cogliano, the national debt is approximately $17 trillion. As our next congressman, what would you specifically do to prevent the United States from passing along this massive debt to our children and our grandchildren?
Well, I'd sure like to think that one congressman could make that kind of a difference. Our system simply doesn't allow that. I think the best thing any congressman can do, being one voice among many, and many on both sides of the aisle, unfortunately, don't seem too troubled by $17 trillion in debt. I hear some voices on our side. I hear no voices on the other. So it's a tough problem for one person to do it. The only thing you can do is work as hard as you can and get involved in the budgeting process. The budget the president submitted the other day was $56 billion higher than the last budget. Most of it goes into education and some other areas, typical liberal programs throwing money to make a constituency happy. It calls for cuts to be made. We've heard that one. It does call for taxes to be raised on high net worth individuals. I don't have to worry about that one. So again, it's the same old thing. So one congressman can work hard, can try to work across the aisle, build bridges as much as we can, make the case that this debt is unsustainable. Try to get them to understand math. They were all counting on the economy turning around enough so that we'd get above 3% annual growth, get some inflation, and that would pay down the debt. It's not working. And as long as we're facing Obamacare and other issues that are going on in the government, the economy isn't going to grow at a high enough level to pay down that debt. So sooner or later, they're going to have to face it. And while I can't, as an individual, change it, you can bet that I will work hard and be a voice to make a sensible budget, to make cuts, and to stop this debt problem in America.
Thank you, Mr. Shores.
So, if you read recently, the Congress said, voted to, folks would say, increase the debt. Well, the vote was to suspend the debt limit, excuse me. The vote was to suspend the debt limit. We don't have a debt limit right now for the next year. There is no debt limit. So let's just start there. We have a serious problem right now. Everyone knows, what it is. It's we're passing on this huge amount of debt to our next generation. This is very important. This has to, but we can do this. It's not like, this thing that's going to kill us. We can do this. We can, and what we need to do is a combination of cuts and economic growth. Repeal Obamacare, that threatens the economy. There's no question about that. Repeal, and you can go down the line, repeal unspent stimulus funds, $40 billion. Has it worked? It hasn't. Let's repeal those stimulus funds and get those back into the coffers and go by the budget line by line, expenditure by expenditure. We have 14,000 unused buildings in the United States, structures that have been labeled as excess or underutilized. There's $15 billion right there. We have to cut the budget. Okay, is that gonna pay off the debt? No, it's not gonna pay off the debt. What's gonna pay off the debt is economic prosperity, small business, pull back the regulations, create an economic environment where small business can grow. The National Federation of Independent Businesses, which analyzes small business health in this country, has given Congressman Keating a 0 score. A 0 score. This community is small businesses. This district is small business. What is Congressman Keating doing about that?
Mark?
The second component of your question is what can we do to alleviate the future generation, the next generation or two from this debt? And I'm sorry to tell you that the answer is nothing. It's upon us already. So we have to think further into the future about this. Now, let me partially sidestep here, because part of the question was what can one congressman do? So there are we know there are 435 congressmen in the U.S. House of Representatives. I think about half of them are useless. That leaves a little over 200. And I can do the work of any 2 of them. So I can do about 1% of the work of Congress myself. Now, levity aside, it's a simple matter. It really is a simple matter. Every one of us goes home from this evening and in the future, and we look at our revenue and we look at our expenses. Now, sometimes one exceeds the other in a way we wouldn't like. So maybe you borrow from one of your other accounts or you borrow from somebody else. But the next month you don't want to do that again, right? So you adjust. You borrow less and you try to work harder and bring in more. And over the long term, that's what we have to do. We simply have to restructure by limiting our expenses, cutting back on our expenses, and raising, unfortunately, we're going to have to be raising our debt limit in the coming years, right? That doesn't mean we have to raise our debt necessarily, but you do it in a limited fashion, and you have a long-term structured plan, just like you would, of limiting your expenses and slowing down the growth on your debt. I'll leave it at that, and I hope that answers your question. Thank you.
John?
When speaking about the national debt and when you're speaking about reform, Vince mentioned one person can't do it. I actually think one person can do it. When we're talking about the debt, it's just too important not to focus on it. $17 trillion and growing. Every child born today is saddled with $54,000 of individual debt. This reaches the level in our Congress of being reckless. We're talking about generational theft here. I'm a fiscal conservative. I believe in smaller government. I believe in balanced budgets. I believe in lower taxes. I believe in a friendly business environment that will lead to more and better jobs. Out of control spending and debt are burdening us all, and we're, as you all know, in a true financial crisis. We need to look at reforms throughout the federal bureaucracy to deliver services more effectively and reduce the cost of government. So you need as a government reformer. I am the only person up here who actually has a record as a government reformer. I was the Commissioner of the Department of Industrial Accidents here in Massachusetts for Governor Mitt Romney. I eliminated a 5,000 case backlog when I was in office. I saved the Commonwealth and taxpayers over $1 million a year in outside counsel fees by bringing lawyers inside to do the litigation. I also increased the compliance with the agency stop work orders from 40% to 100% compliance. I wouldn't be afraid to make tough decisions. That's what we need in Congress. We need to make tough decisions, and we need to have the courage to do it. I will do that.
Thank you. So this next question from Mrs. Stebbins, starting with Mr. Shores, will be the last question in this round. To Mr. Shores.
Thank you. Mr. Shores, the President via executive orders is changing laws, including Obamacare, without the consent of Congress and in disregard of our constitutional form of government. What do you perceive as the solution to this dangerous practice?
It's a very good question. When I was in law school, I wrote a number of papers for course. I took seminar courses, and I wrote about various issues relating to the separation of powers. I studied this part of the Constitution very carefully. Without question, President Obama is acting in an unconstitutional manner. He is essentially, particularly with respect to Obamacare, he is changing the law in order to make it work. He's actually repealing the law piece by piece, which is somewhat ironic. In fact, it is ironic that he's doing that. I believe that the framers created a government of limited powers. I don't think there can be any question about that. Limited powers. And there's three separate branches, and normally the branches will check themselves. There'll be a case or a controversy, someone will have standing to sue, and it ends up before the justices at the Supreme Court. This is a different circumstance because, and I've read about this, the scholars are saying that it may be difficult for anyone to have standing to sue on President Obama's actions. For example, a congressman, the experts don't believe that a congressman would have standing to sue. And so having trust in our framers, the question is, what can we do to stop the executive from exceeding his scope of his powers? And what we can do is vote the right representation into office and vote the wrong ones out.
Mark?
So this is a real conundrum, because when a sitting president violates his oath of office, violates the provisions of the Constitution, he should be impeached. However, I'm a little bit torn on this one, because this individual has demonstrated such overreach and incompetence that he's actually awakened the American population, and in a backhanded sort of way, may be the best thing that's happened to this country in many, many years. The fact of the matter, I'll discuss this a little bit in my closing statement as well. It's a subject I love to pontificate on. So the answer truly is impeachment. And then one has to assess, is it worth going through those gyrations and the damage? And that's a long and a difficult question to discuss. I say only half joking. I'm not sure if impeachment is the right answer right now. And I'm not sure if we're better with this president in or out. Let's take the Senate in November, and let's turn a lame duck into a dead duck president.
John?
I thought humor wasn't allowed.
Can't help it.
But this disregard for the Constitution is absolutely reckless by this president. And first, I just want to state my admiration for the Constitution. It's the greatness of our nation grew out of this document. I would say I'm an originalist. I look to the plain meaning of the Constitution, and I apply common sense to its interpretation. I don't subscribe to the theory of those on the left attempting to reinterpret the Constitution in different contexts in today's modern world, and suggesting that the interpretation should evolve with the times. It's a great document that provides guiding principles to us today as a nation. We should always ask ourselves, what was the original intent of our forefathers when interpreting the Constitution and applying it to today's laws? It's too bad our president doesn't do that.
Vince?
Full disclosure, I started a company that couldn't have started unless Ronald Reagan had signed an executive order granting a set of circumstances that we could start our company and work with the Department of Defense. There is a place for executive orders. Certainly the one that got us into business wasn't a very big one. Every president has used them. Every Congress, except this one, has been troubled by them. James Madison said that when you're dealing with a president who's reckless and wants to usurp power, Congress must exert the power of the purse. We wrote that into the Constitution to bring presidents in line. Well, has this Congress stood up for their rights? It used to be if a president tried to take on too much, both sides would get together and say, we can't let this president infringe on our territory. That's the way it's supposed to work. The executive always should stand up for itself, and he does, but the legislative must also, and that's not happening. And as long as it does, you'll see all these executive orders and no standing to sue. And as Mark said, trying to impeach him wouldn't work for Republicans, especially in an election year, as we know. So Congress has to work together to exert its supremacy. And if I go there, I will fight hard for that, because when one branch of government gives up its power, the other two are out of balance. And that's what's happening now.
Thank you, gentlemen. You were very good on the time. Let's see if you can do this.
You should be happy we're not John Kerry, because he can't do yes or no.
Let's see how you do.
This from the Lincoln Douglas debates too?
Not quite. Mr. Neal, we'll start with Mr. Alliegro on question 1 and the lightning round, yes or no.
All right, Dr. Alliegro, while it is wonderful to have 4 strong candidates for the Republican nomination for the 9th District, sometimes those who are not successful in a primary simply refuse to help that nominee. Do you pledge to work tirelessly for whomever wins the Republican primary?
John.
Emphatic yes.
Vince.
Yes.
Mrs. Barrett to Mr. Chapman.
Mr. Chapman, do you support the federal government seeking the death penalty for those convicted in the Boston Marathon bombings?
Yes. Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Mr. Perini to Mr. Cogliano.
Mr. Cogliano, do you support the elimination of the so-called death tax?
Yes.
Mr. Shores?
Oh, yes, I do. So, excuse me.
Yes.
Yes.
Mr. Stebbins, we'll start with Dan Shores.
Mr. Shores?
Yes.
Would you support a Would you support a constitutional amendment to require a balanced federal budget?
Absolutely.
Yes.
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 Who said the Republican Party was the party of no? Yes. Yes. Now we're going to have closing statements, 2 minutes each this time, gentlemen. We'll start with you, Mr. Alliegro.
2 minutes, I planned for 3. All right, so first I'll cut off my thank yous.
There you go.
I'd like to say thank you to the moderator and the panelists and for everyone who helped to organize this thing. We need 100 more of these between now and November. I have to choose which sections of this to cut out. I'd like to also, and I will not cut this out, I would like to thank my supporters. The only way I'll ever really truly be able to thank you is to work as hard as you and to make us all proud in November, so thank you. Now, some people, like the current occupant of the White House, like to profess that this country needs fundamental change, right? But I understand that the United States is not just a landmass in North America. The United States is an ideal. It's a destination for millions of immigrants. It's a land of freedom and opportunity. to strengthen the to fundamentally change the United States is not to strengthen it, but rather to erase it. So, when somebody in the White House or your current member of Congress, who does so as quietly as possible, professes to support these policies and this agenda to fundamentally change the United States, you need to question his wisdom, you need to question his intent, and you need to show him the door. So, we also don't need a permanent class of politicians in Washington, D.C. I like to tell all of my people that we need politicians, we need statesmen like John Adams and Patrick Henry and later on Davy Crockett, who went to Washington, D.C., did the people's business, and then got back on their horses and went back to their plow and their pen and took care of their own business. So, who would have believed, listen, I want to leave you with a note of optimism. Who would have believed 5 years ago that a state like Wisconsin, and I'm a rational optimist, I take in the data, I review it, I analyze it, and I make my judgment. The data coming in from the 50 states is good. Who would have thought 5 years ago that Wisconsin would have a Republican governor, a Republican state senate, and a Republican House? Who would have thought that we would do that this November in Massachusetts? Thank you.
Thank you again to the members of the Sandwich Republican Town Committee for having the debate, and all the people who gave up part of their Sunday to come here and learn about the race and us candidates. I also want to thank my opponents. I have great respect for all of you. And I know that any one of us would make a much better congressman than the current incumbent. However, with the job we're all seeking, experience matters. I'm the only candidate before you whose accomplishments include working at the White House under President Reagan, at the SEC as an enforcement attorney, and as an agency head for Governor Romney. I know how to balance a government budget. We did it here under the last Republican governor without raising taxes. I've worked in the trenches, first for Ronald Reagan, then for Mitt Romney. I'm not afraid to tackle the tough issues, and I know how to get things done. I can win in November. That's why I have the support and endorsements of people like U.S. Senator Scott Brown and Gabriel Gomez, our U.S. Senate nominee last year. As you listen to everyone here today, in essence, you're interviewing each of us for the position of congressman. We answer to you. You are our prospective employer. Who do you want to hire for the job? I hope when you consider everyone's qualifications that you decide that I'm the one with the right experience to get the job done. I would be honored to have your support and your vote today. Thank you again.
Vince? This has been quite an experience. This is actually, I wasn't on the debate team in high school or anything like that. I do like to talk. Everyone who knows me knows that you always have to give me a 30-second and then a stop. But being in a debate is quite different. It's been my job here today to try to convince you that I can best represent you in Washington because I have business experience, because I've dealt with real-world problems and know how to solve them, that I've had political experience to a certain extent. I was a selectman for 6 years. Like a lot of folks, I was one of those people who never wanted to be involved in politics. I used to be in the media, okay? So I distrusted all politicians. It wasn't until, Vinny knows this guy, Fran Marini. You know him too, Jeff. Fran Marini told me when I told him I wasn't interested in getting involved in his campaign back in 1994, he said, "Oh, Vince, you're one of those people. You like to sit around and complain about how bad government is and how bad politicians are, but you're not willing to get off your butt and do something about it. I understand." I went home and I thought about that, and anyone who knows Fran knows how strong he can be, and I got involved. I was working 6 days a week. I had a lot of other responsibilities with our farm and everything, but I found a way to make the time to do it. Became a selectman for 6 years. The last 7 years, chairman of the Plymouth County GOP. Being involved takes a commitment. I've had real-world experience and I can do this job. My job is done. Now it's up to you. You have the toughest decision, because you have to look and listen at all of us and say, who can best beat Bill Keating? And on top of that, who can go to Washington and fight on my behalf and understand what I'm going through? I'd like to think I'm that person.
Dan?
We're in the Hall of the American Legion here, Post 188. On this day, about 70 years ago, a group of soldiers reached the top of Mount Suribachi on Iwo Jima and raised the American flag. We all admire that photograph, where our soldiers bravely secured their position on that windswept mountaintop in the middle of battle, representing American courage, resolve, and freedom. 3 of the Marines that raised that flag were killed just days later, paying the ultimate sacrifice for the freedoms that we now have and enjoy, while protecting the world from tyranny. 26,000 casualties to capture Iwo Jima. We have to remember where we came from, what we've done, what price we have paid in order to know who we are. We have been a symbol of all that is right in the world since our founding: freedom, innovation, growth, optimism, prosperity, hope, independence. And yes, we've made mistakes, but we've learned from those mistakes, and we've never dropped the torch of freedom from our hands. Every generation has a decision to make, a job to do. Our job is to reclaim prosperity. We'll fix the economy, which requires getting the government out of the people's way and getting our working families back to work. We will pay the debt and balance the budget. We will reclaim our standing in the world and be a leader and beacon of hope and prosperity. I will make an ideal candidate for this district, and I can win. I grew up here. I fished here. I played high school sports here. I went to public school here. I own a business here. I have a world-class education and legal experience. I understand our values, and I can make a difference. Give me that chance. I will fight for our prosperity in Washington, and I hope to earn your vote on the campaign trail. Thank you.
Well done, gentlemen. Well done. So now comes a tough decision. I said earlier that at the end of their debate, you'd have the opportunity to weigh in with your feelings today. You have 2 questions before you on that straw poll. The first question is who you believe won the debate. And the second question is who you would vote for. When you're done with your ballot, if you'd raise it up, we'll have our 2 lovely ladies who pass them out collect them. And if you give us about 10 minutes, we will tally them. In the meantime, if you want to see the campaign treasurer for the SRTC, he'll be at the table with that basket.
Oh, you can leave it closed.
And the nomination papers are also waiting for your signature.
Sure, well, we had a great debate. All 4 candidates showed the differences that they have with their opponents. There were a lot of commonalities between them. The one thing we know for sure is that whatever gentleman wins the primary, they're going to be a much better choice than our existing congressman. So get involved, not just in voting. Pick one of these candidates, support them, donate to them, work for them. Let's see what happens in September.
And then support the winner.
Support the winner. Well, we purposely asked that question as part of the lightning round to get them all on record that they would support them. Sadly, we've had too many experiences after a primary where the losers either go away or become part of the problem. So we have a commitment from all 4 of them that they'll stay involved and help the winner.
Well, it was the first time I've ever really been in a debate. It was a great experience. I really enjoyed it. You know, we had 4 very good candidates, and I liked it. I had fun.
How did you feel having your first debate?
I felt great. I mean, I know somewhere
there was a document that said we had 3 minutes for the closing statement. So I had to compress that to 2. But it's okay because I think we had made our point by that time, and I don't think it made much of a difference. I think another thing I'll just point out is I heard lots of people down the line from me say, I agree with Mark, I agree with Mark, I agree with Mark. So I'm very happy about that.
You're feeling good?
Yeah, I'm feeling good. When the other guys are agreeing with me, I'm feeling very good about it.
Thanks.
Yeah, this was actually the first debate I've ever participated in. I feel great. I think I made outstanding points. I think we were facing a lot of important issues right now, and I think that we have to work really hard to overcome them. And I think I have the leadership ability to do that in the United States Congress, and I'm going to keep on fighting.
But this is our first debate with this, and I think it's terrific because what we have here in the 9th Congressional District is that you have a choice. And the people of the district know they have 4 good candidates.
Another round of applause to our 4 wonderful candidates. But just as on the primary day and in November, there can only be one winner. And today the results are, for who do you believe won the debate? Dan Shores received 22 votes, John Chapman received 25 votes, Vince Cogliano received 56 votes, and Mark Alliegro received 115 votes. And the second question is, if you had to cast your vote in the Republican primary today, which candidate would you vote for? Dan Shores received 25 votes, John Chapman received 33 votes, Vince Cogliano received 48 votes, and Mark Alliegro received 112 votes. Thank you everyone for coming. We appreciate your interest. Support the candidate of your choice, and let's win in November.
It was great today that we had a lot of people come out and support these 4 candidates. It tells you a lot when we overfill a room, actually, to have these people talk to us this early in the campaign. That means there's a lot of interest, and I'm sure the momentum will continue to build all the way through the primary and into November. The debate.
I think it's going to be very close, and I feel very comfortable having come, and I now know I can support whoever wins.
I thought the debate was absolutely wonderful. It's the first time that I've had to see all 4 candidates in one room at one time express themselves. Looking forward to having many more of these debates. Diving deep into the substantive issues that separate each candidate from the other, but this is a great first start. This overflow, standing room only crowd, the excitement certainly for all 4 candidates. And it's just the beginning, and I'm looking forward to a spirited, passionate primary. And whoever emerges the winner, move on to victory on election day.